Greetings. So I'm going to start a little bit of ink work, a drawing, something simple. One of the tools that I've been using of late has been fountain pen nibs. I've had a whole gaggle of old fountain pens that worked or didn't work or were somehow unfortunately disabled. And so I suddenly had it upon my little brow to try to do some drawing with some of these fountain pens. And so I pulled the nib from the body of the pen and attached them basically to sticks, wooden dowels I got at Walmart. And this one I'd used some super glue and copper wire. They work quite well, and I would always recommend to go to, Salvation Army or any kind of used thrift store, or go online and find some old used fountain pen. And then what you do is you just pull the nib out of the body of the pen. It just comes out. Some pens are different than others. Some manufacturers have the nib attached to the body of the pen differently. For instance, there's a Chinese company called Hero, and they make quite good fountain pens. And I have several of them that I've taken out the nib from the body because misuse, neglect, and general wear and tear meant that everything about the pen was falling apart, but the nib was good, so I pulled the nib out. But they don't fit any specific nib holder or anything other than whatever I could customize. And again, wood dowels from Walmart. They work pretty well. Never been a proponent of big fancy art supplies. When I was a little kid, my parents would go up to the big city, and this shows you what kind of childhood it was, where the big city was the nearest big city, which was Rochester, Minnesota. And on Broadway there was an art store, Carson Art. It's been long since defunct. That was one of my favorite places to go. But you'd see what kind of art supplies that were available, $100 paintbrushes. It's like, wow. You look at something like that and you'd think, that must be the most awesome, wonderful brush on planet Earth. It's just a brush. Nothing fabulous, nothing wonderful, just a brush. And that's one of the things you kind of have to bear in mind when you're looking at the art supplies and you see some fancy, expensive art supplies, and you think to yourself, that's got to be the best art supplies that you can ever buy because it's so expensive. And you think about what the Renaissance painters had. Quite often they had to make their own art supplies because manufactured art supplies, as we today see them, did not exist in their day. There were artisans who crafted art supplies for artists. But it was more than likely such a specialized task that only a very few select could do it. And a lot of the art supplies themselves were, at least the bare resources that the art supplies were crafted from, were enormously expensive. Just a simple skull today. Nothing fabulous, nothing remarkable, just a skull. It was 2001, toward the end of 2001, that I started to get into drawing skulls. It was never something that I was really big into, drawing skulls. But certain events that happened in 2001, I was inspired to do a gaggle of drawings and sketches and the like to parody the concept of war. And over the course of 3 years, hundreds of drawings, sketches, and plans to make large pieces of artwork from the drawings and the sketches. Drawing skulls had become kind of an obsession. Not necessarily a very, very pleasant obsession. And this isn't realistic. The intent isn't to be realistic. And that's one thing to bear in mind, is you see an awful lot of art that's very, very stringent on being as realistic as humanly possible. And that's all fine, but art doesn't necessarily require absolute complicity with realism. Reality is a tool. No different than a brush. No different than a pen. Reality is a tool. And you use it as you see fit. And there are some instances where reality is quite necessary. But reality doesn't necessarily need to be an absolute in regard to art. In fact, sometimes realism can detract from art. So there. Nothing exciting, really. It's just a skull.